Opportunity for public comment. We just have one speaker this evening. We have one speaker tonight because there are 6 speakers or less. Speakers will be notified at 3 minutes, but allowed up to 5 minutes to complete their comments. We expect all speakers to honor the time limit, refrain from using any inappropriate language, and be respectful in their comments. Speakers who do not meet these expectations may be prohibited from speaking at future board and/or committee meetings. Speakers are here to address the board, not the audience. The school board and this committee does not endorse any comments made by members of the community here tonight. We would like to remind our community members of the impact of their words on others and that our children are watching. We commit to communicating with you in respectful and productive ways and ask that you do the same. We also expect that the audience will be respectful of the speaker and of the board and refrain from responding with verbal comments, cheering, applause, or other behavior that would detract from the meeting. Please note that no obstructions can be created between the board and the audience. Visual aids cannot be used, and the area behind the speaker and podium will be clear during public comment. Also, in order to respect our speakers and meeting participants, please silence your cell phones. And our lone speaker this evening is Mr. Paul Reese.
Good evening.
Good evening.
What I want to talk about today is when complaining about bullying actually becomes bullying. You know, that this is used as a tactic to harm someone else, to complain about the constant bullying that someone is doing, to make them investigate it, and to use it as a form of intimidation. I worry about that. I see that because it's tossed around here an awful lot lately, this notion that bullying is, it's just, I see things lately that I haven't seen before about concerns that it can be used to bog down the system, to clog up things, and just as a form of intimidation and of slowing down the system and just to complain for the sake of complaint. Another thing I want to talk about is we talk about making life easier for students, parents, getting parents more involved. And one thing we could do is grading. Fix grading. In A, B, C, D, F grading, so someone can understand what the heck's going on with their kids before they're in high school. You know, before they're a senior in high school, and that, so we know where the kids are at. And it makes things so much simpler if they can understand where they're at. You want parents to come to your meetings. I know I work with other people too, and when I would go and their teachers are talking in circles about things, and you, as a parent, when you're new to this, you don't know what they're talking about. You're asking, well, where are they at? Where are they at? And they won't give you straight answers. But a grading system gives you a straight up answer where they're at. And I don't even have to show up and I know where they're at. And it makes things a lot easier on parents. And if you could see easier, for me, it's not easier necessarily for the teacher. I know when you got a big area that you can drop them in, that makes life a lot easier on you. And when you have to break it down into so many points, that may make it easier on the person doing the grading, but not on the person reading it. So that's it. Man, is it echoey in here tonight?
Thanks. Thank you, Mr. Reese. We come to our action items for the evening. First action item is approval of the minutes. Looking for a motion.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Matteo. Is there a second? Second. Thank you, Mr. Zenobia. Is there any discussion on the minutes?
No.
All right, seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? 5-0. Next action item is policy 5113, open enrollment program, inter-district.
So we have and had on our books for a very long time the open enrollment policy. This is the process that families would use from outside of our school district who wish to attend school in the Waukesha schools. The past practice of the board and of administration has been that the board will set the seat assignments, the seat numbers, which you do in January based off of projections. And then after that, the enrollment process then is handled by our enrollment office and through our administration, using the guidelines that we have listed in open enrollment, following the seat requirements, following space allocations, existing expulsion orders, things like that. The administration then goes through and approves or denies open enrollment or places kids on waiting lists. The policy that we had on our books never explicitly gave that authority to administration, and just to share, that has been in place for the better part of the 15 years or so that the open enrollment program has been in existence. So just, it has been historical. Essentially, the big addition to this policy is that it can delegate that authority to the superintendent or the superintendent's designee in the district. And that is the recommended change that I'm bringing you tonight, just to make sure that the policy captures what our past practice has been. And one of the reasons it has been done this way in Waukesha is just the sheer volume of requests that we would get. If we were a different district, perhaps a smaller school district where you were dealing with 20, 25 OE apps, that'd be one thing. We get hundreds of open enrollment applications. eAchieve is essentially, serves an open enrollment population by and large. And then the number of other open enrollment outs that we have in the district, which go into the hundreds, and then the other kids who want to come to our brick and mortar. So from a volume standpoint and a practical application, it's been an administrative responsibility historically. We just want to make sure that the policy captures that now.
Any questions? We're looking for, Mr. Zenobia?
Just to clarify, I think you may have answered the question. Our practice as it is right now, the superintendent is making these decisions, correct?
I actually am, through his authority, yes.
Sure.
Yep.
So the policy change, as you say, is just to put into practice what we're already doing?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep, the board would still, and again, to reiterate, the board would still set the seat numbers in January based off of our best projections that we have at that time. And then through that process, you'll designate that kids will go to a wait list, that kids will be, have access through policy to eAchieve, should that be the place that they want to go in the district. So the board will have that authority. It just becomes the management after that transitions over to administration.
Are we looking for a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Zenobia. Is there a second? Mr. Moore, any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? 5-0. Next up, under the action items, is policy 5215, missing and absent children.
Yeah, again, these are recommended changes. They're not required changes. I just want to point that out to this policy. But it does provide definitions to our staff when referring to either a missing child or an absent child. And you can see in the definition that an absent child means one that's left the child's parents or approved placement through social services and whose whereabouts are known, but who refuses to return. This involves children who are runaways but not known to be missing. And then a missing child is somebody whose whereabouts are unknown. It is important that we have definitions for these terms, as, for instance, our social workers would be working across agencies to do this. They might be in contact, and our administration might be in contact with law enforcement, the Department of Health and Human Services in Waukesha, even internally. So if we do have to make a report, we want to be clear as to what each term means.
That's consistent with what you use as well.
Well, this does provide some clarity because sometimes these words are used interchangeably. This child is missing, but they're not actually missing. They're just absent from home. And so we want to make sure that we have some definition to that.
Any questions?
Just briefly, thank you. And there's some new language in there suggested regarding allowing entrance of these students into a school building and then the procedure thereafter.
Correct.
Okay, which makes sense. We
Yep.
don't want to exclude those children from
Right.
a safe place, so makes sense.
Mr. Zenobia?
Just a question, is this, in the case of missing children, I really appreciate the language that's here, especially dealing with victims of human trafficking, which is becoming unfortunately more prevalent everywhere. Do we, as a district, I mean, I would assume these are very low instances if they've happened here recently. Do these situations occur?
Yes, they do.
Do we have enough resources, I guess, in the form of an SRO? I mean, is this something that's beginning to tax the district in a sense, or is it just something that we want the language in the policy to clarify?
The language in this policy and the procedure helps clarify what we would do if if we come across a missing or an absent child. To the end, does these types of scenarios bog us down? They don't. It's one straw, though, on the camel's back that does ultimately lead to the workload that our social workers, our counselors, our psychologists, our SROs, assistant principals and such have to deal with. So it is one of those added layers that they pay attention to. On top of that is the mandatory reporting of abuse and neglect. On top of that is the general welfare of students that they're dealing with on a day-to-day basis, attendance issues that we face. So this is a component of what they do, but it's not the overburdensome part of the job.
And it would cover, not only all the schools, but all the district property. I mean, anywhere could technically be a place where something like this could occur.
Right, anywhere where we would serve students,
Okay.
including eAchieve. If we ran into this situation at eAchieve virtually, we do have student services staff, and our eAchieve administration has to work oftentimes across counties to make sure that, issues of homelessness, issues of missing and runaway children, are reported accordingly.
Yeah, thank you.
Markel?
This topic hits home for me because I was one of those children. So my question is, do you all refer these students to different resources? Like, do we have social workers to refer them? Like, let's say, the absent child, whatever, do not want to go back to their foster care placement or their biological parents because their home is not safe and school is the only safe place for them. I have kids in my classroom who experience those things. So what do you all do in terms of referring them to resources so that they, have the support that they need? Like, are there other programs like youth services or teenage shelters or group homes or, other networks outside of the district? Is there any partnership with that?
Yeah, we do have group homes and shelters in Waukesha. Those are primarily designated for adults, though. So the unaccompanied youth, we would be working closely with the county social workers to try to provide some services and options to. We have a myriad of county and city-based partners that we work with to try to get, resources to kids. But, for the middle school age kid who's missing, we're working closely with the county and law enforcement to make sure that either missing, absent, reported to school, that we begin to get that connection. If there's an investigation that's required, the police and county services can do that. But to get that child some secure shelter and a caring place for them when they're not in school.
Thank you.
No problem.
Any other questions? Looking for a motion? I can move approval. I'll move approval. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. Any further discussions?
No.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, 5-0. Next up is policy 5461, children at risk of not graduating from high school.
Yeah, so the policy's been on the books for a long time, and we've had a board-approved process. We bring that back annually. It has traditionally been in the Teaching and Learning Committee that approves the at-risk program for kids. We will be moving that over to the Student Services Committee. That'll come to you in August. What this policy does is it just assures that we are bringing forward our at-risk plan to the board for approval, more for your understanding of what's going on every year, that we're making sure that we're meeting our obligations and trying to find as many pathways as we possibly can for kids to graduate from our system. So you see that additional language on the first page of the policy. Our plan is comprehensive. It aligns to what our statutory requirement is. For the board's perspective, and you'll get more details next month, East has been a primary location for serving students who are at risk, but we have moved credit recovery and at-risk services into our high schools, and we begin having this discussion as early as fifth grade for kids that are demonstrating behavior, attendance rates, and everything like that, could put them in a position where they're not going to be successful through the rest of their schooling. So we want to catch kids early. We have our district processes in place, and again, more details will come in August, but we want to ensure that the board, through whatever administrators are here, whatever is working, Luke Pinion has moved on, Mark is taking over for Luke. This is something then that shores up that the board will have eyes on that at-risk policy each year.
Any questions about this policy? Mr. Montiel?
Thank you. And this revision doesn't change that procedure, that policy at all. It just, I believe clarifies that the plan that we developed is a global plan, not for each individual student.
Correct, yeah. So universally, annually, the board will approve the overarching program for the kids.
Okay.
Each child who is at risk has an individual at-risk plan that will follow them through school to ensure that we don't lose track of kids that may be struggling academically, behaviorally, with attendance, whatever it might be.
Very good. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah, so D here, it means the at-risk student is a school-age parent, so
Correct.
their parents basically in high school.
Yep.
Any other questions? What are we doing with adjudicated delinquents? Is Riverview is closed, right?
So Waukesha County has partnered with Washington County on the juvenile placements. So a child who's gone through the court system and is in need of either a placement through the court process or has to serve, a period of time afterwards. Waukesha County doesn't house that at the juvenile center anymore. We do, though, have kids who are 18 years old who are at the jail.
Okay.
And we have a teacher assigned to the jail.
Okay,
So we are providing services
Okay.
there for, at the county jail.
So where's the graduations now? Is that because I used to do the graduations. We were talking about it last board meeting. Are we still doing that in Waukesha, or is that happening in Washington County?
What we've learned over time is that the students are completing along the way, and there hasn't
Okay.
been a desire to participate in a ceremony.
Okay. I got you. Yeah, because there wasn't one this year.
Yeah, right, and the numbers have been up and down. I mean, when you think of kids who are going into the jail or even young adults, you might have them for 2 weeks. You might
Right.
have them for a week. You might have them for a month. So the time frame that they're with us, what we want to make sure that we're doing is providing an education while they're there, so that if they return home to their home school district or their home county, or if they come back out and come to one of the Waukesha schools, we're in a position where that education is continued while they're locked up.
Okay. Excellent. Any other questions? Looking for a motion?
I'll move to approve. Move to approve revisions to policy 5461, children at risk of not graduating from high school as presented.
Thank you, Mr. Montiel. Is there a second?
Second.
Mrs. Zenobia. All those in favor, any more discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, 5-0. Next up is policy 8450, control of casual contact communicable diseases.
So there is quite a bit of addition to this policy. It talks about the initial exposure and suspected communicable disease. I asked for the purpose of this discussion that we forget about COVID for a minute, because we had communicable diseases prior to COVID that we had to deal with. We had chicken pox come into school. We had hand, foot, and mouth come into school. We had some noroviruses that would come into school. We had things that we had to report that were beyond our control, that we sent over to the health department. So what this does is it captures that. COVID obviously put a spotlight on this for everybody. But I'd ask that you think back to, say, 2018 as to what we need to do in order to address endemic and pandemic situations in the school. So what you see here in the first paragraph talks about, if somebody starts to exhibit symptoms, what will happen to the student. We want to get the student out of what would be the general school environment as soon as we notice something that's there. Send the student home from school, notify the Waukesha County Health Department of the incident, so that they can conduct an investigation if they deem it necessary. And again, a lot of this was discussed in and around COVID, but it did happen regularly beforehand. As we talked about, some of the pandemic type things or endemic things that we dealt with in the past. We had the swine flu 2010, 11, somewhere in there. That was something that, ultimately led to one of our schools being closed for a short period of time due to absenteeism. We could run into this with a bad season of the flu. Whatever it might be, we just want to have that process to communicate with the health department. You can see what the protocols are during a major health crisis, bottom of page 1 into the top of page 2. And then you'll see a large segment of this that is redlined. It's important to note that policy language exists in 8453, direct contact communicable diseases. So this is being removed from 8450 because it already exists in another policy. So I don't want you to think that we're not providing that clarifying language, it's just in another location.
Questions? Mr. Zenobia?
So in this initial exposure where it says the staff member shall contact the Waukesha County Health Department to report the incident, health department officials shall be responsible for conducting any investigation deemed necessary and directing the district to follow specific protocols, including those established by the Wisconsin Department of Health Services. So in the past, even prior to COVID, the flu was reported. I mean, things of that nature where they must be reported.
Yeah, influenza would be reported to the county, but it would start to be those things that would start being at high rates. So every day we monitor our absenteeism in the school district. When we come into the flu season, we pay a little bit more close attention to where student absenteeism is at. If we have a lot of kids that are sick with similar symptoms at schools through the health reporting or through what parents share with us in a positive test, that could trigger us calling the health department and saying, and I'm only using this, I'm going to provide this as a clarifier as an example because it's not happening right now. North High School has hit 10% absenteeism today. Kids are experiencing abdominal symptoms, whatever it might be. We notify the health department that that's happening, and then they would start to look into potential disease investigation at that point.
So it's not necessarily, well, it may be a one case, but if we have enough students that are out, that may trigger this, because I guess I'm just trying to understand if this language was not present in the past, yet we were obviously reporting any of those instances that seemed like they could be outbreaks, correct?
Yep.
So this language is just to put into the policy what's already being covered.
Codifies what the statute, what they're requiring, and it's the board then directing administration to do a certain thing, or our nurses or whomever it might be.
Okay, so I just want to maybe coattail some of that same area there, where it says, report the incident, the health department officials shall be responsible for conducting any investigation deemed necessary and directing the district to follow specific protocols. So it's still up to the district whether they follow those protocols then.
That's correct. However, there's a caveat to that. The health department can shut you down. So, I mean, they can say you've hit a certain level and you must close this, or you've hit a certain level and you must do that. They have the authority
Sure.
to step in and do that, which was the example that happened, I believe it was the thing that happened around the swine flu. It predated me, but I'm looking at Mr. McCaffrey, who was on the board then. They can step in and direct you at that point.
Bethesda, it was Bethesda.
Sure, okay. And then administration takes whatever action, let's say they follow or don't follow. How then can the board step in and, I guess, change what they're doing? I'm trying to get a sense of,
What, you mean what the county's doing?
well, no, relationship between health officials to the district and then, I guess, oversight of the district.
Yeah, well, the county trumps us, so if the county wants something shut down, they're gonna shut us down, so there's nothing we can do. We could define,
Right.
we could go to court.
I guess, well,
If you want the administration to change what they're doing, we would have it agendized at the full board, and we would vote to change what they're doing.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, and then the board has the ability to call an emergency meeting to address an emergency situation, and the board then could, make a decision on their own. I mean, we had some examples where the board called meetings during COVID to address a variety of reasons, and ultimately it was up to the board vote if quarantines were going to continue or if masking was going to continue, so those decisions could come, regardless of where the state was at, for instance, for a health order, or where the county was at with a health order.
Right. And
But
that's
the board would have to do that through its action.
Right, that's probably its most recent example was the
Right.
May meeting. Oh, yeah,
And the county and state stuff, that was guidelines.
Right.
right,
And the county purposely made it a guideline. So,
right.
we could overrule the guideline.
Yep.
So, but if it would have been a mandate, we would have had to take them to court.
Right, exactly, and that's kind of what I'm trying to get at,
Yeah.
clarification, all that, and how these three different bodies would
Right, yeah.
work it
There's
out.
a lot of guidelines.
Yeah.
Because, no one wants to run afoul of another government.
Right. And then,
Sure.
From a practical standpoint, using recent examples, we have kept close contact on those cases where, I'll go prior to COVID, where we started to see, higher numbers of flu cases, and we were in contact with the county. We were monitoring those attendance things very carefully day by day. They never hit a threshold where it was like, we're very, very concerned that this could be a widespread outbreak in a school. But, during COVID, we started out with a statewide order, and then that statewide order held through whatever challenges it went through, and those were the things then that we followed at that particular time. When the statewide order was lifted, the board, started to take action and make their own, the board's own decisions as a whole body. A situation that was more recent, though, if you remember back, the prom at North High School, you guys had some communication from us as administrators on that. People were demonstrating similar abdominal issues after the prom dinner. And the county did a disease investigation, food poisoning investigation as a result of the prom. It didn't impact how we operated on a day-to-day basis, but it hit a threshold where they were concerned and they stepped in. And I think that's the most recent non-COVID situation that we were looking at.
Appreciate
Mr. Montiel.
Yeah, thank you. I read this as of basically two parts. One is that initial exposure, suspected communicable disease, that describes, and it even talks about in the second one, an initial or isolated identification of a possible presence of a communicable disease in school. Those things that we just spoke of talk about how the district will isolate that student, notify the county, and go through those processes. And then if there is indication of a pandemic or epidemic, then it goes into protocols shall be developed with the consideration for the following resources: statewide declaration of emergency and related orders, guidance provided by medical or other public health officials, Wisconsin Department of Health Services, Wisconsin DPI, local health department, parent and student groups, and other resources. So it's not binding on us. What the policy says, at least my read is, we consider those things, which is what we always do.
Correct.
So it's just so the public knows everything I'm telling you, you already know. You've presented this to us, and I'm just trying to, I guess, discuss it a little bit more so people who are watching may have a clear idea.
Yeah, we want to make sure that, unless absent, I guess what I would say is absent point A, statewide declaration of emergency and related orders, things beyond that become guidance to us.
Correct.
And we want to make sure that we're taking in, as many possible sources as we can.
Right.
So for instance, as we tried to manage COVID, we had the state order, and when the state order was lifted, we had, guidance from the DHS, we had guidance from DPI. We met with and listened to the doctors at Children's Hospital.
Right.
And that helped us formulate plans for reopening and managing, within the school environment. Plus the Waukesha County Health Department, they were a great resource for us. And that's how we navigated, the full year of school, not this past year, but the year before. And
Right.
and then ultimately, the transition of decision-making fully came to the school board, and the board made the decisions that led us into, I guess, what was last school year. So.
Yep, absolutely. Nothing here changes that.
Correct.
Correct. Okay. Thank you.
Mrs. Zenobia?
Everything that Mr. Borowski and Mr. Montijo just stated is, I think, laid it out clearly. I think the problem that I have is when we get to the guidance portion of this. And I say that because I think there's a few pieces outlined that we could just simplify the language. Obviously, we're going to take guidance from all of these places, which we have in the past, but I guess I don't see the point in singling out, four places when we could just say something like, local, state, and federal health officials and medical professionals. I think to have the guidance portion of this single out these institutions, within the policy, I think gives those institutions a premium over perhaps, and I know this is trying to cover all the bases, but why can't it just be something simply stated in the guidance portion, as opposed to having B just have simply local, state, and federal medical professionals and health officials?
So,
I mean-
so from my understanding is we would come forward with a refined policy. You would be looking at combining B and C and making a simple statement saying local, state, and federal health agencies.
Just something very simple. And to, really, in addition to that, a clarifying question being Part D, which says parent and/or student groups. What does that guidance, or what in the past has guidance from someone like that look like? We're talking about on just the student
from
sick, the parent calls in, is that what we're?
No, from an endemic and pandemic, I mean, the board, I believe, based off of my observations, definitely listened to, the parent community and students as we made our decisions, as the board made their decisions throughout the course of the 2021 school year.
Okay.
So, I think if, I can't assume, but a scenario could have played itself out that if nobody came to the podium to speak, that maybe the board would have made different decisions as time went on. People would have just accepted it. So by not commenting, people would have been speaking, or by coming to the podium and speaking, you would be taking information from the interests of our parents and students and making decisions around the endemic or pandemic situation. Like, for instance, if we had to close school, a 2 or 3 day closure to address a flu is something that's probably much more palatable than a 2-week closure to address, a widespread COVID outbreak in a school or something along those lines. The duration of it, the impact that the families had, I think that weighed on all of our decision-making. But it was definitely something that everybody was listening to through those months of board meetings.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
I'm so sorry.
Mr. Moore would be.
No, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, and my apologies to Mr. Moore. We also had that, I forgot the name of the reopening committee.
Yeah, we had the reopening committee.
Right,
Yep.
that was a good example of that, too, so.
Yep.
Thank you, appreciate the courtesy.
That was what I was going to ask.
Mr. Zenobia?
Just to follow up then, I would look to combine B and C and just simplify that language. Obviously, we would take guidance from all of those organizations, but, many others. And again, I don't know why we would state just 4 when it would be many. So I know those are the big ones. Those are the big ones that, in the past few years, but I think it could be simplified.
Sure.
That would be what I would propose.
What if at the end of B, we're just discussing here, at the end of B, we still listed those but said among others, or would you rather have them out of there?
My opinion is to just simply state, B says guidance provided by health department officials and local medical professionals at the health department officials and medical professionals at the local, state, and federal level. I think that covers all our bases. That's would be what I would propose there, the change.
Just,
Meant to?
I'm sorry, just the lawyer in me would suggest we strike everything, if Mr. Zenobia would grant me this, tell me if I'm misunderstanding you, strike everything after officials and after the word by, put local, state, and federal. So it would read guidance provided by local, state, and federal medical and/or public health officials? Is that what you're looking for?
Yeah, I mean, you could insert medical professionals and/or public health officials. That would be fine, yes.
Okay. I have no problem with that. I think it accomplishes the same thing. It's just tighter language, so.
Yep.
And I don't think the end result would be any different.
And if the committee approves this as amended, we will have that mocked up using Mr. Montijo's draft for the full board next month, or next 2 weeks.
So,
So do you have that verbiage?
so it's guidance provided by local, state, and federal.
It should be and/or federal. It should be and/or federal.
Sure.
So provided by local, state, and/or federal medical and/or public health officials.
But, yeah, that would be the verbiage.
And you,
Is everyone in agreement on that? Because we're going to be doing a motion shortly.
and, okay. Do you think, all right, do we need to say health officials and organizations, or just health officials?
No, I think that's,
It connotes more
Very
like
clear.
individuals versus, I don't know if it matters, but it connotes more of an individual versus a body.
and in addition, we'd still be keeping D and E to that, which would become,
Right.
I guess that'd be A, B, C, and D then. I'm sorry. Don't want to confuse anyone. A, B, C, D, we'd still have 4?
Yeah.
Okay.
A, B, D, E.
We'd be keeping D and E there, yes.
Yeah,
Right.
and not having C, because we're kind of
Right.
combining it.
Right. And it's just guidance.
Yes.
Just
There's
guidance.
still a whole bunch of court cases
Oh,
going
yeah,
on.
no, I know.
So it's just guidance as of today.
Does someone need to, I don't know who's getting that in the
No, we're
minutes?
good. As long as we're good with that change, the motion would be as amended. You know, you would motion, whoever's going to do the motion, to approve the policy as amended.
You want to just read it one more time, Corey? You have it, or Mr. Montijo, excuse me.
Sure.
Or Mr. Zenobia.
I would move to propose the changes as amended to policy 8450, control of casual contact communicable diseases.
Do you want to read the amendment?
Yes. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Zenobia, but the amendment would affect page 2 of our document. It would modify section B by striking the language after the word officials and inserting after the word by the following language, quote, local, comma, state, comma, and/or federal. And then it would strike section C in its entirety and rename section D, section C, and rename section E, section D.
Correct.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Montijo. Any further discussion on this policy? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? 5-0. Moving on to our final action item of the evening, approval of key performance indicators.
So, as we've been talking about at other committees and at the whole board, the district is in the process of approving some key performance indicators. Up on the big screen, I have that, it was included in your packet. But as we look at the specific work of this committee, if you were to go to the third page of what the KPIs are, the 3 specific indicators that we would be looking at, working on, monitoring, would be the Student Engagement, Hope, and Wellness Survey, the Parent Climate Survey, and then the Academic Performance and Risk and Behavior of Students of Color using the risk ratio. And so all of this is just presented to you tonight. You know, will take action on it as a board. I'm not saying that this is the final step, but these were the areas that we prepared for this evening for discussion. So I give you that just as a point of reference. I am now going to take that down as you have it in your packet, and then I have a short presentation this evening. Oops. Too much technology on my computer or my place tonight. So as I said before, the key performance indicators, and again, this is just a link to it. I won't go to that in a moment. But when we looked at the Student Engagement, Hope, and Wellness Survey, we looked at the data and the results, and I'll show you those in a minute, district-wide. So this is a survey that's administered at the elementary and some years at the middle school level. On alternating years, the middle and the high school students take the YRBS. That information was released recently to us, so we didn't have an opportunity to really do a dig into that. And it's also not directly the Student Engagement, Hope, and Wellness Survey. So that's a completely separate thing. So what we're looking at is some results across our elementary levels. And what I'm going to present to you is an area that stood out to us in our review. And that is under the category of wellness, where students respect others who are different. If you look at the other indicators that are up on the screen, when I'm at school, I feel like I have procedures in place to practice drills. When I am respected by other students, I feel successful at school. I smile and laugh most days. At school I have. So you look at these other areas, and our performance as a school, what is being, or as a district, and what is being reported to us by students is very high in those areas. We don't see anything that really stood out to us in this wellness area in regard to that. But the respect of other students, how students perceive how other students are being treated, was an area that really jumped off the page. Yes, Mr. Montiel.
I'm so sorry to interrupt, but what are those, I can guess what those.
So green and blue are good. They are agree and strongly agree.
Yep.
And then the yellow and red are disagree and strongly disagree.
Okay, thank you.
So, again, when we analyze these results, the respect of others, how I perceive others are being treated, was an area that stood out to us. So our current level, 64% of the students are favorable in this area. 36% are reporting that it's not favorable. And what we're proposing as a goal, something for us to monitor over the next 3 years, actually 2 years, because we see some urgency in this, is to get from a 64% to an 85% response rate in this area across the students who are participating in the survey. We felt it's important, as you look at the Student Engagement, Hope, and Wellness Survey, given the ages that are surveyed, every year the elementary, sometimes middle school kids are surveyed in this. If kids aren't perceiving that others are being treated well, we feel that it could potentially have a negative impact on the educational experience and the overall climate of the school going forward. So we want to make a concerted effort to address that. Some of that's going to be done through our Student Discipline Committee that we're going to be forming in August, the meetings that we're having with principals, and how we set up each school year. But it's a proposed goal, but it was definitely something that jumped off the page to us. Yes, Mr. Montiel.
Sorry, regarding student feedback, are you increasing the response rate or the positive?
The positive response on that question of the survey.
Okay, all right.
So it's a very targeted goal for us. It's an area that we can drill into. It's something that our principals, school teams can monitor, is that component of the Hope and Wellness Survey.
Got it, thank you.
I mean, ideally, we would love to see that be 100%, like 100% favorable responses.
Right.
Practically speaking, we want to in the next 2 school years, and I know that these are 3-year goals, but again, with a level of urgency, we feel in 2 years with a concerted effort, we can really begin to turn that around, where we would get up to about an 85% response rate where it's favorable.
Very good.
And that would put us in line with those other questions on that wellness page.
Okay, yeah, that was my question, I guess. What's the significance of the 85%? I mean, other than
If you look at the data up here, you can see that, many of these are in the 90s,
Okay.
positive. So we felt that if we could get this one in that direction, we would be much more in line with the rest of the survey.
Mr. Moore, did you have a question? Are you sure? Okay. Mrs. Zenobia?
I do have a question, thank you. I guess my question would be, what is really the program that we're putting in place specifically that will achieve the goal? Is this, the principals and staff are going to go over what respect is? Because, I think that's part of that question. Do these kids really understand what that means? I'm sure they do, but.
And there's going to be layers of education around, what does it mean to treat others with respect? As we, got back into this school year and, as I've shared at other meetings and conversations with other, school districts, we've heard, time and time again, we've heard from our parents, we've heard from our teachers, we've heard in conversations with other schools that the behavior and the kind of the climate that came back to school post-COVID was, I don't have a proper term to describe it, but kids just weren't behaving the same way, and they weren't treating each other the same way as if they had that essentially 2-year period of time of proper socialization with peers and with others in the school environment. And when we look at this question, when you see a question where I feel like I'm respected and belong at school, where you're having a high return rate, about a 90% return rate, but when kids are observing of others that they're not being treated well, people who are different than them, you're starting to see then that kids' perceptions of what treating each other right is. So some of this is going to be done, classroom by classroom as the school year gets set up. Some of this is going to be dug into by the discipline committee over the course of the school year, because there's a behavioral component that's to this. We look at discipline in the sense of that there's consequences, but student behavior it's a communication. Students are either communicating through positive behavior that things are okay, or through negative behavior that there's something that's not quite right. And so we're going to also look in that discipline community, not so much as consequences and rewards, but also like what is being communicated to us by kids. And we think that some of that is contributing to this idea that other people aren't treating other people well. So that's where our efforts are going to center around. So it's not a specific program. I couldn't put my finger on something necessarily. As we were to filter this out school by school, you would see different results in different locations. And the approach at those locations is going to be different. We may find through our discipline work that, we're seeing a higher rate of negative behavior over the lunch hour and recess. So those schools would be looking to put interventions in around the lunch hour and recess. Some school environments, we might see that in the classroom, we're seeing more negative behavior. So they're going to put steps in place in the classroom to try to address, positive school behavior. And when we resurvey this in a year, we'll see the impact that those steps have had on how students perceive others. There's no direct causation I don't think you could do, because there's not going to be one specific approach that's going to address this holistically across our system.
So there's, say at the elementary level, there's not a class time or a designated time where behaviors in general, discipline in general will be reinforced across the board.
At all periods of the day, the transitions, the hallway, the lunchroom, how we handle recess, all of those areas will be addressed from a pro-social behavior, so that we can reduce the office discipline referrals, we can reduce the negative peer-to-peer interaction that's happening. We will do that through a variety of things. That'll be communication with parents, that'll be direct instruction at the beginning of the school year in those environments, that will be in what the teachers do to set up each class period, how they establish transitions from the direct instruction with the teacher to the independent reading to the group reading. All of those things will have steps put in place so that we can hopefully turn the tide on this particular question in our schools.
In this survey, can you make comments after each question or in certain sections, or?
This is not a comment-based survey.
Okay,
This is something for students, and they're giving a rating 1 to 4 as how they're doing on it.
Okay, because all right.
But it is being administered across, 4,500, 5,000 students. So we do have a lot of a lot of responses.
I was just looking at maybe that's some data we could use to then direct your efforts in
Right.
turning it around.
What we'll do, and what I'll update the committee on as time goes forward, is as we analyze our office discipline referrals and when those are being written, you'll be able to see the blocks during the day when, level by level, you're seeing more negative behavior. And, you can predict with some accuracy that the lunch hour is an issue. Lunch hour at the middle school is more specifically a bigger issue. And then what steps are the middle schools going to take to try to settle those environments down, get the kids following the school rules? And a lot of that is going to be parent and family engagement because, we know that we need to have our parents as partners as we work on discipline in our schools.
And maybe you answered this, forgive me if I'm asking again, but Mr. Zenobia brought it up around the area specific to respect, of course, that's what we're talking about. You talked about pro-social behavior, but is there something that's more specific to defining what respect in behaviors, what that looks like? And I guess my concern is you have various degrees of what that means, and, respect isn't necessarily getting whatever you want. What is respect for students?
And that is what will be set up in school. I mean, at an elementary level, your discussion around respect is going to look one way. Your discussion around respect as kids get older, it becomes a little bit more reciprocal as kids move through school because the authoritative figure that perhaps the teacher is, it doesn't stand out as much when you are eye to eye with your teacher. So there's levels of mutual respect that begin to come as kids get older, and those are fostered through good relationships in the classroom where expectations are clear, they're consistently applied, where kids know that the teacher is there, serving in their best interest, where we take the time to establish relationships with parents, caregivers. So it looks different as kids get older, but we know that our staff are making, and as I have my meetings with principals to talk about safety and discipline and such, they're already beginning the planning around what did their data show them last year and where do they want to go with it this coming school year.
Mr. Montiel?
Thank you. As to the scope of what we're dealing with today, my understanding is we're, seeking approval or at least discussion of those KPIs, and this is one of them.
Correct.
And I'm glad you found that, or you and your staff found that response. I mean, the students are literally telling us, I think crystal clear and very loudly, that this is an issue.
Yes.
And the worry as an adult and a parent is when kids take surveys, they're just marking this off. But
Yep.
clearly, this indicates there's an issue. And
If
we're
these
slipping into
results were
solutions.
kind of all over the place,
Right.
I would say that there's probably not a lot of reliability in what we saw.
Right.
But this is, again, one question that stands unique on this page. And it's an area that we certainly can focus on
Right.
as a school system.
And as far as the KPI, I think it's a fair assessment, or
Right.
at least one assessment.
And something that we
tools.
will not fix overnight, which is
Right.
nice within the 3-year cycle that we're looking at with KPIs. And again, like I said, we're looking to try to get this one done in 2 years because we see a level of urgency around it.
Yeah, the goal is not to fix the survey results, the goal is to fix the behavior, therefore the survey results
Correct.
follow.
Yep.
It's a following indicator. And we're slipping into solutions, which is always good. But the scope of what we're dealing with today is just the KPIs.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Any further discussion on that KPI? My only comment would be there's a lot of moving pieces on that one.
Sure.
The administration in this building, administration in the school, the teacher, the students, and the parents. So just everybody realize that this is a KPI that has a lot of moving pieces.
Right. I think that's quite a goal, yeah.
Yep.
For, especially a 2-year period.
Yep.
That's almost a 33% increase. It's a third,
Yeah, and you have to have everyone of those groups buy in, so
Right.
it'd be a tough one. Okay.
The next KPI that we're looking at is the parent climate survey, and this being the first year that we administered that, we had about a 20% return rate this year, and within the next 3 years, so I don't want you to think a year from now, but 3 years from now, we'd like to see about a 40% return rate. And just like that, Google signed me out. So, we think, and through Dr. Siebert's guidance, that, if we could bump that up by 20 more percent, we would see approximately 6,000 responses from our families at that time, which we think would be good information for us. So if you give me a moment to sign back in. Sure. There we go.
Any comments on the parent climate survey, KPI? No? Okay.
The final area then was, that was listed was the risk ratio data, and I presented that last month, and again, just for a refresher, that is the risk of negative school outcomes or negative school experiences for students in relation to white peers. And so one of the areas that stood out in that was at the moment, based off of our current data, we saw a risk ratio of 4-to-1 for office discipline referrals for black students to white students. What we want to make sure is that if we are going to reduce that, if we're going to keep that as a key performance indicator, that we do the right work in this area. And we've heard the stories around office discipline referrals, that are people writing fewer referrals? Does the data accurately reflect that? And we believe that if we can go down by 25% over a 3-year period of time, that will allow us the work, again, through the discipline committee to come up with behavioral norms, to come up with the teaching approach that we need to use with all of our students, to come up with a common understanding of what we need to teach at the beginning of the year and reinforce all school year. And then what is a classroom managed behavior and what is a office managed behavior. So we have a lot of work to do in this area. Again, this would be something we'd love to cut in half, drop by 75%. But what we want to do is make sure that all of the steps that we take are the right steps in this KPI, so that we're very intentional about what we do, and we can get past what has been, recent discussion around, well, people just aren't writing referrals anymore, or we're just not going to refer black students to the office anymore, or administration doesn't respond to our office referrals anymore, or one kid is being targeted over another. We want to make sure that we do the right work so that the system gets properly normed across what the policies are, what the expectations are, and then we give the time to implement that so that it has an actual positive effect on students, and it's just not ever looked at as the numbers were just played with so that we had a lower number. So again, up for discussion, but this is our recommendation based off of the work that we've done to try to support students in our district.
So in that vein of it being a good, strong measure, how is it taking into account the behavior of their white peers getting worse? So let's say, white peers doubles,
It's always going to, white students in this formula are always going to be one.
Right, I understand that.
So based off of our history in looking at this, I can't say the likelihood that the referral rate for white students going up would substantially impact the risk ratio between white and black students in our system would be very, very small. Based off of the number, there are about 750 black kids in our district. There are 65% of our district, 66% of our district is white. So whatever that comes out to is 7,000, 7,500 kids. And we're already seeing this risk ratio there. You'd have to be referring that many more students. So again, in the effort to make sure we're doing it right, we wouldn't want to inflate the number so that another number goes down.
Right.
But we don't believe that would be the case just in practice, because the numbers would have to substantially increase.
Okay.
Yes, Mr. Moore.
I had a comment, I had a question about you mentioned providing teachers the feedback on what is classroom management and what is office management in terms of students' behavior. And one of the things and the reason I'm asking you this, because I think that one of the problems here, I could be wrong, but I think that the soft bigotry of low expectations for black kids, and I think sometimes in my own experience of teaching, I think that some white teachers are afraid to correct students' behavior who look like me because they see it as, or they believe that if they do it, then they're going to be called racist or they're going to be called this. And it's actually not. It's actually more racist to not correct that student's behavior. So having high expectations for that student, just as you would any other child in your classroom, I think will kind of limit the chaos or the delinquency, if that makes sense. So making sure that, you're setting up as a teacher high expectations for all students and holding them to it. But what is that, when you say is that through professional development or?
So again, some of the things that you're saying, yes, absolutely have to come through professional development. Some of it is going to come across, though, like grade level teams or departmental teams coming up with what are those common expectations for every kid. If the expectation is that you'll be in class at the beginning of the period, you'll be sitting in your desk with the materials out, just using that as kind of a standard, before the bell rings, then that's the expectation for everybody. Some kids are going to need additional support to get there, but they're not going to need an excuse as to why they can't do it. So we do want to start with that high expectation, because if we start with that academically and behaviorally, we start to see student outcomes change. And that is the ultimate goal behind this. We can't water down the expectation, because then that starts to become the norm. And we can see, where that has, a negative impact. We want to make sure that the expectation is there. With that, though, we need to ensure that we're providing the supports in places. And so, as you've heard us talk about where we're allocating our title funds, where we allocate the IDEA, CEIS dollars, how our special educators are providing support, that's the additional support that some kids are going to need, so that we can, while we're talking about the difference between white and black students in this particular instance, we want to make sure that that's the case for our students with disabilities, our students who have English language, that are English language learners, things of that nature, so that we have a high expectation. That's going to lead to higher outcomes, but we provide the additional supports along the way. So I agree with you 100%.
Thank you.
Yep.
Mr. Zenobia?
As far as this KPI goes, my concern is in a year where we have, behaviors higher than normal, perhaps, how do we correct those behaviors if, I guess in doing so is going to require more referrals at times.
It could.
And more referrals is going to handicap this particular KPI. So my concern is setting a goal that may be less important than correcting the behaviors and discipline of students, regardless of the background or whether they're white or black. And not to say that the risk ratio isn't important, because we talked about it a lot, I believe the first time here. So I don't see how getting a handle on what is hindering, probably in a lot of cases, the academic achievement of these students, their behavior and the disciplining of their behavior, of all the students in the district right now. How do we do that, maintain and hit or maintain this KPI? I think it concerns me that we may be setting ourselves up for failure here.
So, just in response to that, at TNL, over the last year or so, the TNL committee and ultimately the board has approved the purchase of a lot of universal foundational level materials, common text, common resources across curricular areas, social studies, English language arts. And in doing so, the board is giving the administration and the teachers the framework by which to start to instruct all of our kids, to give that universal expectation, universal experience. By the work of the discipline committee, you're right, we might see more office discipline referrals out of the gate, which is why we're looking at this over a 3-year period of time. In the first year, I would anticipate seeing more office discipline referrals as we sort out what is classroom managed and what is office managed, as we figure out what we need to teach at the beginning of the year and reinforce over the course of the school year, because those things will change. As I presented last month, our office discipline referral numbers, they kind of follow a wave or perhaps a mountain peak over the course of the year. Things start low, they get high, they come down a little bit, they get high again, they come down. What we need to do is be very intentional around those times. So If I were back here in July of next year, I probably will show you higher office discipline referrals. And that would be part of the norming process that we had across our schools as to what's office managed, what's classroom managed, what interventions are we putting in place, how are we establishing and holding those high expectations, because with those high expectations are going to become the deployment of resources to make sure that we're serving the kids who aren't meeting that expectation. I view behavior, and many people that I work with view behavior similarly to people who view math, reading, writing. It's a skill that we need to teach at school. In some areas, we have to spend a lot more time teaching the behavior and setting the classroom up appropriately because kids aren't coming to us classroom ready. As in other areas, they might be coming to us classroom ready. Similarly, if we were to look at this and if we were to replace behavior with reading, there are areas where kids are coming to school already knowing their alphabet, knowing the letter sounds, and able to read those very small beginning reader books. There's areas where kids are coming and they don't know the alphabet yet, and they don't know the letter sounds. And so we allocate more resources to support the kids who aren't at that same level or at that level that we need them to be at. That's how we are going to approach behavior going forward through the work of the discipline committee and then at the school sites. And again, the school sites is where it's going to become individualized to what does that individual school need, because we know based off of what the office discipline referrals have shown us, some schools are going to have more of a lift when it comes to behavior than others. So I do see it as initially we're going to have implementation numbers. But over time, we'll start to see those numbers balance out a little bit, and hopefully through a concerted effort, we'll see this go from a 4 to a 3.
Ms. Moore?
I could be wrong, but thank you, Mr. McCaffrey. But I could be wrong, but I don't think that the numbers will go up if we are proactive versus reactive. So I strongly believe that we have to be setting teachers up for success, which I'm not saying we're not. I think through, a lot of PD on just classroom management. If teachers set up strong classroom management from day one and stay consistent with those routines and procedures, then that limits the problems. I have not seen it where teachers who have strong classroom management on day one, they are the ones that tend to be successful if they stay consistent. So they don't need to, they won't see referrals go up because from day one, they had those high expectations in their classroom. The principals had that high expectation in the school on what's expected for all children, whether they're black, white, or pinstripe. Like I said, I think that, I don't think it will go up if we be proactive by, letting, making teachers go through, PD institutes and training institutes by, okay, we're going to train you as teachers on how to set up a good classroom management. What are the procedures for everything? And even utilize some of those veteran teachers for new teachers coming in so that also reduces the problem too. But those are, again, I don't know everything, but I do know that, strong classroom management on day one will limit those referrals going up. I don't think it will go up if we set teachers up for success so that they can set students up for success. Does that make sense? Or
It does. What we want to make sure, though, that we capture is that if a school team or if a grade level team defines behavior that is acceptable in the classroom and unacceptable, that we're not at a place where unacceptable behavior is ignored. And that, based off of some feedback that we've heard, it's been anecdotal, is that teachers just, the process is cumbersome or they don't feel that they get support, they don't write the referral. We want to make sure that if the behavior is out of bounds, that the referral is written. That's part of that high expectation for us. And so when I refer to the numbers possibly going up in a year, that's what I'm talking about, because it'll be at that point then that we're able to monitor our progress, provide additional interventions, talk about what those expectations are and how we're teaching them, and from there then we would see that the numbers start to go down.
I guess from my understanding of this discussion, if I'm mischaracterizing what you had stated, Dr. Cook, please correct me. You're stating that teaching behaviors, the framework is just like we would teach math or science or reading of any kind. So if that framework exists, and I'm sure implemented at some level here throughout all our schools, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, why is that not a uniform approach that all principals, teachers, staff understand, and is instituted uniformly across the district, how, wouldn't that give us a better indication of where some students are and where some schools are and some populations are within our schools than from when we were talking about the wellness part of it, that, there's a lot of moving parts, which I think we all appreciate. But I guess I feel like if we have a very uniform approach, as best we can do, given the guidance that we have in our own policies, to say this is what is expected of our behavior, this is the approach we're going into with, at least we could see, you could see, from the overall perspective, maybe where we need the most help, where there are the most problems. And, for me personally, whether referrals go through the roof or not is a little concern to me if behaviors are being corrected and kids are improving so that they can learn.
So as I look at behavior, it's an area that we need to teach. And is there an exact blueprint for it? You could go from expert to expert. They'll start at, relationships. They'll start at high expectations. They'll start at, clear and consistent feedback to the students. They'll start with, communication home. Those are all things that we must set the beginning of the school year up with. We know from time to time, if we were to dig into the data, specifically, and we would get in there, we would see kids and groups of kids in the district whose behavior begins to escalate before holidays or before breaks from school. They prefer to come to school. They like the consistency of school. They know what the long weekend or the winter break is going to hold for them at home. We see their behavior start to escalate in school. So those escalations begin to contribute to what our numbers are. So those are the kids that need the extra teaching. So in my comparison to reading, we have the universal ELA curriculum that's been approved, that's going to come with resources, professional development for staff. The universal behavior expectations come when teachers are working together to set that so that we're not dealing with transitional issues period by period during the day. One teacher expects you to be there on time, ready to learn. The other teacher doesn't care if you come 5 minutes late. Those are the things that we need to make sure that are established across grade levels, grade level teams, throughout a school. And that's the work that we're going to get to next year. We've begun that discussion with our administration. You asked at the last meeting, what are we doing? We have schools that are coming together already. They've looked at their behavior data. They're coming up with some of these targeted areas that they want to focus at. They're engaging teachers in what lessons do they want to create for the beginning of the school year to teach the expected behavior, and then how they're going to hold themselves to the place where they're reteaching that as the school year goes forward and enforcing it. So that work is already happening. But I don't have a really good blueprint for you to say, like, this is going to be the thing that's going to address all of these behavior, because as we start to tease out the office discipline referrals with that committee and start to come to some conclusions, we might find, and I think I said this at the last committee meeting, the number of students, we had about 250 students who had 20 or more office discipline referrals last year. We had about 450 that had 1 or 2. So when you start to think about the number of kids, 250 across 12,000, that are contributed to a substantial number of those, we needed to dig into that data a little bit more clearly so that our future presentations to you as a committee can be a little bit more specific as to who's being referred, why they're being referred, and what type of behaviors we're seeing manifest in school. So yes, we need to teach behavior. I look at it as if we need to teach reading and math as well, and the work to address that appropriately across our system is to come.
Thank you.
Any other comments? All right, I'll be looking for a motion for the approval of key performance indicators, just so I know this is going to move up to the board.
This will be part of the August.
Yes, and the board as a whole will approve the key performance indicators, so. Looking for a motion.
I so move to
Thank you.
approve the KPIs.
Second, Mr. Zenobia. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? 5-0. All righty, that concludes our action items. Next up is discussion information items. And our first item is a family engagement update.
So this evening, we have Patty Hobble here, who has led our family engagement work for our school district, and she will take us through presentation of the work that they're doing this summer.
Hi there. This is called an update because I presented on family engagement in March. But that was the Teaching and Learning Committee, and that was not you guys. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background information, and I'm also going to give you the slide deck from the March presentation. So let's get this up on the screen. All right, so I am the Director of Special Education, and the reason that I'm talking about family engagement is because we have 20 indicators that we have to report on to the state, and then the state reports to the Federal Office of Special Education. One of those indicators is on family engagement. Indicator 8 is a family engagement survey that families receive every 5 years. Our district families who have a child with an IEP receive it every 5 years. And that very much guides our work in how we address the family's needs, sharing our common goals for a student's growth and development, a student with an IEP. And so we have a variety of strategies that we're doing in terms of family engagement work. Home visits is one of those. And so I'm going to be talking about home visits in a little bit. Our work here in Waukesha is, we're very fortunate that we have a supportive agreement with the Wisconsin Statewide Parent Educator Initiative, WISPE. That is a Wisconsin DPI grant-funded project that is intended to support and improve the experience of families who have a child with an IEP. So they work very closely with us. This past year, I actually had 4 WISPE coordinators supporting our schools with our projects because of the new home visit work. And just to sort of set the stage for you, Powerful Partnerships is a book by Karen Mapp and Carver and Lander. Karen Mapp is a researcher from Harvard on the topic of family engagement in education. And she states, creating meaningful partnerships with parents will help your students succeed both academically and socially. Here is what the research tells us. When parents are engaged and involved, their children succeed. Specifically, the children's grades go up, they attend school more regularly, they're more likely to enroll in higher level programs, they're more likely to graduate and go on to college, they are more excited and positive about school and learning, and they have fewer discipline issues inside and outside the school. So the home visit model is a new addition for us last year in our family engagement work, and it was supported by the National Organization on Parent-Teacher Home Visits. And that's part of our stipend agreement with WISPE to support our district. This is a shift for us. So home visits aren't a totally new concept. We've been doing them for years with children who are receiving early childhood special education and with our 4K families. But for teachers K through 12, this is a big shift. This is moving out of your classroom, meeting the families where they're at, or wherever they would like to meet. If they would prefer their local park, if they would prefer a virtual option, those are all agreeable for our teachers who are doing the home visits. And the goal of these meetings is really to learn about the child's family, what's important to them, listening and learning, and asking, what are your hopes and dreams for your child? As professional educators, we get very caught up in what we have to deliver, and it's really about the children that we're working for. And so knowing what families are hoping for is critically important. And when a child is there and present and is at the center of that conversation, it's really meaningful for that child and family to see, we're all in this. We're all caring about him or her. We all want something to happen in his favor. So the training that our staff went through was a 4-hour virtual training last June. And they had 5 basic non-negotiable expectations. The visits are voluntary. Educators choose to participate in the home visit program. They aren't required by their principal. It isn't a building-wide expectation. And the parents who are approached and asked and invited to a home visit can decline. They don't have to commit to it. The teachers are trained, and they're also compensated for these visits because they are occurring outside of their school day. Parent-teacher home visits focus on hopes and dreams and goals for the student. This is not a meeting. This first fall meeting is not a time to talk about what I heard about your kid last year. It's a time to build a new relationship for the new year. The educators plan to visit a cross-section of students. They do not target a subgroup of students, and they always go in pairs and do reflection afterwards. So with those 5 principles in mind, the training points out that you want to start this practice small. Each teacher was expected to start with 3 families in the fall home visits, ongoing communication during the year, and then a spring home visit as well. This is different. This is in addition to parent-teacher conferences, which are about achievement, grades, the child's adjustment at that grade level. So just another example for you of that timeline. The first visit is very much about communication, relationship building with the family. And come spring, we really have some more information to talk about. We've had the relationship all year, and now let's talk about the progress your child's been making in school. So here's a little background on what our pilot year included. We had 30 educators and principals attend the virtual training in June, and their plan was to implement during the 21-22 school year. So Banting, Hadfield, Hawthorne, Lowell, and Summit View all participated in that first training, and they delivered the home visit model during this school year. Banting, Hadfield, Hawthorne, and Lowell are schools that have done a lot of family engagement work with me the last few years. Summit View got on board when I spoke to all the principals about here's where we're at with family engagement work. It was probably the spring before, and the principal of Summit View said, I have teachers that would want to do this. Can we join? And so they were added in. And then by February, I had Whittier also wanting to join in, and from the first 5 schools, 15 additional teachers went to the February training. There's a lot to this work. Because of our work with WISPE, this is really about not just putting home visits in place. The building team members do a lot of work on self-reflection. What do I believe about the families I serve? And what do I believe about my role to engage families? And what are the barriers that are preventing us from connecting? So staff at each site completed a self-reflection rubric at the beginning of the year. They did the Powerful Partnerships book study, and then the self-reflection rubric again at the end of the year. And kind of important things happen when you go through that process. They recognize that when they go through this experience with families, that there are things that they can do to make progress and achievement more attainable. So in our pilot year, we had 36 staff trained in June, and we had a total of 55 families participate in the fall home visits. By the time we got to spring, we had difficulty scheduling, and some families had moved away. So we only had 38 families participate in those spring visits. Again, a reminder that this work starts foundationally with special education dollars, and we want to impact families who have a child with an IEP, but the work is not specifically or solely for families who have a child with an IEP. In these schools, they invited families of a wide variety to these meetings. It is not solely for children with IEPs. 27 of the students total in our pilot year were students with IEPs. So here's the whole update part. We have another August training date, and we have 35 additional staff who are attending. There are 2 more elementary schools who are title schools. Those first 5 are title schools. And then we have 2 more title schools that are participating. We have a non-title elementary school and a middle school, all doing the August training. And so a lot of what has happened to recruit interest in the other buildings was just those conversations around staff beliefs between principals, the relationship building that teachers have shared with each other, their friends who also work in the district, are concerned about at-risk students, that we want to do something that we can engage their family, hopefully as a strategy to be more preventative about ongoing issues. So I just have a little bit to share with you about end-of-year outcomes from our pilot year. We have some parent perspectives to share. Families shared that they liked the extended conversation, the ability to cover social topics. They may have been nervous at the outset because they weren't sure if this was going to be about concerns, but they learned that this is about the teacher wanting to connect. It's a cool idea for teachers to visit homes. It gives them a better idea of where the child is coming from. And I like this one. Our family enjoyed the virtual home visit experience. It was casual and focused on getting to know each other. My daughter was excited to share her hobbies, her favorite school subjects, to show off her Lego creations and talk about her summer. There was no pressure. There was no need to prepare anything. We just look forward to more home visits in years to come. In terms of staff, I mentioned the rubric, the self-reflection rubric. This is one of the statements from the rubric and an example of how an individual added their comments to this question. The rubric statement is, the teacher sees engaging all families as part of his or her core role and responsibility and works to continuously increase his or her effectiveness. So in September, this particular teacher said, I believe reaching out to families is key, but also believe families should reach out to us. It is a team effort, and we are all key players in the student's education. It is not just one person's responsibility. Having learned some things about barriers and family perspective, in May, this person had a different mindset. The part that's holding me back in moving on the rubric from a 3 to a 4 is how extensive making a plan is for all families. It's been hard to engage all families, getting some to call you back or email or touch base at the end of the day. The all piece is what I would like to work towards. This may have been, there were some teachers that were not content with the expectation to do 3 home visits. They wanted to do more or all, and I think this person realized, wow, that's really a big ask. It's a big ask on a teacher, and it's a big ask on all families because you need to know where they're at and what they need from you. Some more staff perspectives. I've made it a goal to reach out to all families in my class at least once a month to elicit feedback and to learn how I can better support their child at school. I communicate with families regularly, but I need to get creative with how to have families respond and continue to respond. Through my professional growth goal this year, I have significantly increased the number of families that I initiate consistent and positive contact with. I'm still growing and being accessible to families, and I often have difficulties making phone contacts. And sort of a good overall wrap-up to the staff perspective is that I felt that this year was a learning year, and I'm ready for next year with a better plan on how to engage families and follow up with them. So in terms of end-of-year outcomes, I definitely have goals for improvement. During our pilot year, there was no data collection plan established for us by the Parent-Teacher Home Visit Organization or WISPE. So I have it's on my agenda for my Family Engagement District-wide team that we need to build that for ourselves. I want a consistent perception survey for our families to share with us their thoughts and for our staff. And then really I'd like to find a way to measure the impact on student outcomes. At the end of this year, how did these students change in their performance, their attitudes, their perceptions of their school year, and then if we can follow students over time who continue to have home visits, what will that look like for them, for that engagement piece to benefit them educationally? So that's my update for you. Family engagement home visits.
Any questions or comments?
Just remind me, how many more visits will be done this year than last year? What's the number?
To be determined. We'll have a whole lot more. We'll have double the number of teachers, and the teachers who were in their pilot year last year can commit to doing more. They can commit to doing more. They'll have some better idea of how to manage that efficiently. So I'm looking forward to seeing a larger number.
I just want to say thank you for all the work that you put into this, but also thank you to the staff also who volunteered to sign up and wanted to do additional training. Teachers are asked to do a lot. And, I think that it takes a strong commitment to even continue outside of the work to go on home visits. And so I just commend you and the teachers who are really putting in that time and effort. I don't want that to go unnoticed, your acknowledgments. I know it's about the child and the family, but also from my perspective, I want to just say thank you to you and the teachers as well. And the families who also signed up to participate. So.
Thanks, I'll pass that on.
Anything else? Mr. Zenobia?
Thank you. I know you kind of answered one of my questions in the presentation about teachers going to visit up to 3 families was kind of the goal. And so how does that work going forward? Does the teacher stay with those families like through the elementary, or do they pass them off by grade? Or once that relationship is built, what does it look like through, say, elementary school, through middle school?
That's a really good question, because the expectation isn't that if I'm going to do home visits, I have to pick 3 children from my classroom, and somebody's coming along with me, because we always do these in partners. There's actually a lot of benefit to, because you're thinking about that second person who's coming along on the home visit. Who's that going to be? Is it going to be another teacher, the art teacher, the speech pathologist? Who's it going to be going on that home visit? And so there could be some carryover from year to year of a home visit being with someone in the building who sees the child every day at recess or lunch, or but isn't actually their classroom teacher. So there's flexibility in that in terms of who's going to be on the home visit team going forward.
Okay. No, that's great. I think it's an essential part of the program. I'm sure teachers will want to be doing this more than, in addition to their own teaching day-to-day, will want to be engaged with families like this. Once all of the staff, or as much as can be trained up in this area, I'm assuming we don't have enough teachers and staff to cover all families, but the goal would be to, have a portion of the student population and then kind of carry through. And I didn't see this happening in the high school level. Will it happen at the high school level as new students come in? Will there be any of this?
So it's been voluntary so far. So much of my family engagement work has been with titled schools. Title I also has a requirement to deliver family engagement events for families, so it was a very good pairing of Title I teachers and family engagement for special education to build, for example, some literacy presentations, inviting the whole school to those literacy presentations, but making sure we're getting what the families with a child with a disability need, as well as everybody else. So at this point, it's scaling up as principals and teachers are demonstrating interest. So we're now past the point of just title schools. We now have 7 title schools, 2 non-title schools, and a middle school for the fall. I would love to see it continue moving through all of our buildings.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else? Any other comments, questions? All right. Fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate you taking your time. Alrighty, next up on the discussion information items is the school nursing report.
So annually, we have to come to a committee. This has gone from oh boy, how has this all gone? We've gone from the original safety committee in the district to the finance and facilities committee to the safety committee to finance and facilities again, and now to the Student Services Committee with this report. But we do need to provide you an update on the school nursing services the district provides. So we have 3 full-time nurses in the district. Right now, Beth Pepler, Megan Kohler, and Megan has recently resigned, and Carrie Glorioso are our district nurses. So we have 3, we have 2 people that are going to be on a 260-day contract, so they'll be here all summer long to help cover summer school, special programs, things of that nature. And we'll have 1 person on a 190-day contract, and that person has recently been hired and is in the process of transitioning in. So we're coming to you with our, this report was written at the time of the old model where we had 3 210s. We're experiencing some turnover in the nursing pool, so we wanted to shore that up so we can have some consistency year after year, which is why we went to 260, 260, and 190. We do have nurses on staff that are providing direct student care. You'll see that reflected in the report. So if a student requires direct nursing services all day long, we will hire for a nurse or a contract with an agency to provide one-on-one nursing for that child over the course of the day. You'll see numbers broken down based off of the number of health room assistants. We have substitute health room assistants, the number of contacts that we have every day with our students. Our health room assistants and our nurses just do a phenomenal job for us. They definitely put the care of our students at the forefront of their day-to-day work. We had 90,000 health room visits this past school year. That is for a variety of reasons. So some of it is for managed care, things like diabetes, medication distribution to students. Some of that is for the day-to-day issues that come up. I have a headache, I don't feel well, things of that nature. So you'll see numbers fluctuate from elementary, middle, and high school. Some of it's based off of the size of the building, some of it's based off of the age of the student, and some of it is based off of the healthcare need of individual students at the school. So you'll see those numbers there. The training, the nurses have in here the training that they provide for our staff. The communicable diseases, if we go back an hour or so in our discussion, the type of illnesses that they've come across over the course of the year, proactive work that they're doing around training for our staff around bloodborne pathogens and such, and then vision screening for our students. Our nurses are Medicaid billable, so they're able to bill for students that we have consent to bill Medicaid for. And then just our partnerships, our local partnerships for our nurses to gather information as they handle their day-to-day assignments in our district. So can answer any questions that you have on this report.
Do we do exit interviews for the nurses that resign too, or no?
If they wish to participate in one. The field of nursing right now it's very fluid. The hospitals and clinics can't find enough nurses. So, we have been fortunate that we've attracted very good nurses. So we've had a good pool of people, and we've hired very good nurses on as staff. But I think that we'll continue to see some turnover until, there's just more nurses available. The school district nursing position is very attractive for somebody who's been in nursing, to know that, we employ our people generally based off of like when the school year calendar is. So for a nurse to be able to have the holidays with their family instead of being in an on-call or a rotating schedule. So we do attract people who want to work in that type of environment. The 260-day nurses, they get vacation time and they have the holidays off. So again, it can benefit them similarly. It's also nice to have people on all year because of the number of events that we have. So with the summer school program, we need to have nursing coverage for that. For the ignition or the startup, the boost up events that we have in August to get kids ready for school, we need to have nursing staff on hand because we don't want to deny a student with a health condition access to any of those opportunities.
Any other questions or comments about the nursing report?
One other quick one.
Okay.
For the health room clerical assistants and the people who sub in for that, is there like a ratio per student or district size? Like,
We have one per building. And that's what we provide. So, the volume, we don't double up on the volume. It's one per building.
Mr. Matteo?
Thank you. I'm putting you on the spot, but could you give me information, maybe at a later date, as to the health room visit totals for 21, 22? Butler seems to be quite a bit higher than the other locations that are reported.
Yeah, so, and I can just give you some anecdotal right now. The Butler was a school where Amanda Mack is our Director of Elementary Special Ed. She oversees the nursing services. Couldn't be with us tonight for the meeting, but we met with the administration and the health room staff there just to look at the overall number of visits that they were experiencing. And what we found was that there was I don't want to say an open pass, but generally speaking, an open pass for kids to go there. So you look at middle school age kids who are experiencing a variety of things in their life, who may be hungry, who may have some avoidance issues, who may have legitimate health things, and the health room was a convenient place for them to go. So what they did is they put some procedures in place, April, May-ish, to end the year. And what we're looking to do then is to monitor that more closely over next school year to see if that comes in line. Now, that being said, we do have schools that have a higher number of students with diabetes, there. So those health room visits, you're going to see more numbers, naturally. Schools that, like a smaller elementary school that you'll see that may be higher on this chart, generally speaking, that's as related to a handful of students who have medical conditions there that require day-to-day or multiple times a day care.
Okay.
And you'll see that in some of these instances.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else? Excellent. Alrighty. Next up is our 2021-2022 school safety drills update.
So again, annually, we have to come forward to you with our drills. The numbers were provided to you in your packet. A few years back, and again, I looked at Mr. McCaffrey, we were found to be non-compliant with our fire drills and our safety drills, so we put some procedures in place. Glenn Norder at the time, and then Tim Williamson at the service building really helped us, capture when we do our drills. For the committee's perspective, anytime we do a fire drill, a weather drill, or a safety drill, principals need to record that in two locations. One of them is in a written log in their office, and they have to maintain that. The second one is in a Google form that is managed by the service building. And so we know then that, like, towards the end of the month, if you aren't doing your drills, you get a friendly time to do your drills email to, make sure that we're reminded. The requirement is a fire drill every month that students are in session. So if you have summer school at your school during June and July, if you have a startup event that happens in August, and then every month from September to June, you need to make sure you do a fire drill. And then the state requires us to do 2 weather drills and 2 safety drills every year. We do exceed that, and we'll have more information in August for the committee on some of our safety work. We do exceed the use of our safety drills. You can see on there that we had to do classroom holds and whatever it might be, more randomly throughout the year. And again, for the committee's perspective, you will see 4 drills that were conducted every September. We do those proactively so that we can communicate after the drill with parents, staff, and students what the purpose of the drill was, and get the year off to a good start as to, this is a fire drill, this is why we do it. Here are our safety drills, this is why we do it. Here's a weather drill, this is why we do it. We want to make sure that we teach that to our kids and our parents so that there's not as much surprise when that comes later in the school year.
Any questions on the school safety drill update? Alrighty, thank you very much. Next up is other business, recommendations for future meetings.
I had a couple, I had sent an email to Mr. McCaffrey earlier, maybe a week ago, to have a couple of policies looked at that couldn't make the agenda, so just would request, I know they're going to be agendized, but it was policy 5500, the student code of classroom conduct. and 5511 dress and grooming. So, thank you.
Thank you. Anything else that you'd like agendized for the next meeting? Alrighty. Excellent. Alrighty. That concludes our meeting. Thank you very much. Appreciate your time.